Hello everyone, Edain here and welcome back to the Edain mod. Today is going to be another quick tips video, this time going over Rohan. So it's just me discussing little ideas that I've thought of that helps make the best out of every unit, hero, power, building, so on and so forth. Let's get started. Firstly, we're starting off with the units and we've got the basic peasants. Once these have been fully drafted and considering all the different buffs they can gain, they are actually more powerful than most starting units. So don't be afraid to get a lot of them, draft them, and just throw them at your opponents. It's not always going to work, but it's going to work most times. The Rohan farmhands can be used exactly the same way. Just get a bunch of them, build them into a clump, and just throw it at your enemies. You'll be surprised how much damage they can do. Plus, they help protect against cav, which your normal peasants won't do. In some ways, they give them a volley ability that the yeoman archers get. Actually, is better than a permanent formation because you don't have to micromanage the formation. You just press the ability, and then you've got that damage and attack range for that amount of time. A little bit of lack of movement speed, but if you're defending a tower, you're fine. If you're in a clump with your peasants, you're fine. It's just a good unit to have good abilities with. Just because the pitch thrower's ability says it only is good against buildings and machines, it also does AoE damage. So if you've got a clump of enemy units, throw them at them, one or two of them could kill an entire group of orcs, for example. They should not be underestimated, these pitch throwers. If you ever play in a way where your yeoman archers or pitch throwers aren't really well protected and cavalry just constantly keep assailing them, or you're playing as someone who's really good with cavalry, I recommend getting these spear throwers. They deal good revenge damage, they have really good ranged attacks that they knock back enemies, just don't put them into melee. They are so fragile, like basic archers, but they are way more expensive, so your money you're losing for losing this unit is a lot more impactful than using a unit of yeoman archers. I'm going to go over the Rohirrim Lancers, the Rohan Exiles, and the Royal Vanguard all at once. They're all technically the same unit, but with small little tweaks. So they're all really good at charging. Just use them to charge down enemy waves that are not protected by pikes. Just run them out, get them healing, do it again. The Rohan Exiles are easier to get because of how quick they get recruited. And then the Rohan Vanguard, the Royal Vanguard even, get even more value in the fact that they cost no command points. So you can get these in quick succession, where the Rohirrim Lancers you might get if you don't have access to the camp. Cavalry that can gain a formation that just means they cannot trample may sound bad on paper, but is actually really good if you're just using them to run around and destroy enemy buildings. This is not a trample unit. They've got the same damage as the Rohirrim Lancers, but with this ability, you can just make them more versatile and have them as a running back and forth unit to harass the enemy's economy. Even though I personally don't like using this unit because of the fact I just like to run down everything, these units do have a very good use in that they can just penetrate heavy armor. That should not be underestimated in a late game scenario where against any faction, because nearly every faction can get heavily armored troops, then it's a good reliable way of dealing with anything that a good cavalry charge could not. Truly the best unit of cavalry in the game, because of its amazing abilities, should always be looked at. Try to get them, but don't force yourself to get them. Your cavalry army is already amazing. Getting these would just be a little bit of extra icing on the cake. I recommend for the captains and the 3 unique heroes you get from the King's Camp to tailor them to your current playstyle. If you've already got a massive army of cavalry, just build it up with more of them, because Elfhelm can heal, Grimbold can help push down enemy units, and Erkenbrand can summon more. Basic captains have amazing abilities no matter where their specialty lies. If you're against Cav, you might want some more powerful pikes to deal with anything that comes your way. Or you might even want swordsmen, since these swordsmen, under a captain's command, do bonus damage against pikes, so your cavalry have less chance of running into a stray pike unit. The only thing I can really say about the Battleground is be careful with how you move it. If you move it like this, it has to do a full turn before it moves. But if it's already moving, for example, you can see it makes a turn instead of trying to do it all the way around, which means it can survive against enemy attacks easier if you let it do these U-turns. Don't just try and do a twist, because then you're stuck and then you're screwed, because it's likely to die to anything in its vicinity. The Onager has probably the tiniest projectile of any siege unit, meaning if your opponent isn't particularly aware of what's happening, they may not even notice their building is being besieged if they don't pay attention to the little mini-map. So you can just get these in quietly, have them attack something. They'll probably get it half destroyed before they even notice an onager is attacking it, in which point it may already be too late. The fact this little guy costs more than a unit of Rohan peasants is a bit alarming, but if you just want to find an enemy resource building, not have to dedicate a unit, slowly walking towards it, just send this little guy, have the hay cart pulled down. Again, if they don't pay attention to the minimap and they don't pay attention to their building getting destroyed, this can destroy a building. Although it is recommended only against resource settlement buildings, not on a base, because it will get very quickly noticed and very quickly destroyed. Okay, and now onto the buildings, starting with the flour mill, which I recommend having at least 2 of in every base you have. Either castle or camp start, just start with 2 of them and start generating peasants. Because the stud farm can be built on both bases and settlements, you can actually get the discounts for cavalry really early on, and with the right power you can actually make that cost reduction go to your elite units, which are the Royal Guard. Like with Gondor, I recommend keeping your archery range at the back of the base, just so your archers can be brought out and attack anything that's in like the centre of the base where it's being held back by infantry. It just makes it so that archers can be a bit more effective before anything actually happens to them. In some games, you may never feel the need to actually build a stables in your base because you'll have an exile camp, for example, which just helps generate even more cavalry. But if you want the horse shield upgrade, which does help in certain situations, it is good to have at least 1 stables in a base. Perhaps after demolishing a flour mill once you get to the late stages of the game where you want those extra cavalry units more than peasants. From this building, you get both your siege units and your upgrades, both economic and military. It's such a good building. I always recommend getting it, at least 1, if not more. If you're a person that enjoys siege spam, always want to get more research done quicker because it can be time consuming to get all of these at once. Even though it's only 20 seconds compared to Gondor's 30 seconds, the Rohan faction as a whole has more cavalry, so that extra damage and armor can go further because you've got more time moving around before that buff wears off. But I would still recommend getting 4 of them, get all your heroes, demolish all of them, maybe keep 1 if you've got an outpost that you've not built into an exile camp. And again, I'm going to compare the well for Gondor to the well of Rohan. The well of Rohan, even though you have less base slots, is actually more important for Rohan at all stages of the game because you don't have a reliable source of constant healing in your faction. You have a few that are good, but not always active like you've got for Gondor. So perhaps having a well and a heroic statue in a side outpost is not a bad idea. I'm going to give the same advice again for the towers as I did for Gondor. Just put 3 of them in an outpost that near an enemy base to stop them from taking the outpost back. Just hold them back for as long as possible before they take it back, because it is likely they are going to take it back if you've got your attentions elsewhere. Not only is the assembly point a well and a tower, if you paid extra money for it, it can give you your best hero. Should always build 1 of these, and it saves you having to build a well in your base when you want to have another resource building instead. Although you can interchange it, so it all depends on circumstance, what you want best. I forgot to mention this in the ranking outpost video, but this camp also gives allied units 30% damage and 20% move speed, and that persists for 15 seconds after they leave. So having this building acts as a heroic statue of sorts that works on everything. It's so good. So good. And it makes all your best units. So build 1 of these in a place you know is going to be safe. Don't build like in the front lines where enemies going to be throwing siege at it because you're not going to be able to keep it forever. And then we have exclusive to the castle starts of Rohan, you can build the flag towers, which is another excessive damage and armor buff for anyone in the aura, which again is perfect, as I mentioned, with like Rohan's archers. Give them extra damage and range, give them that extra damage and armor, they can cut down nearly anything in their path. This actually makes Rohan's archers more powerful to defend their base than Gondor's archers, and that's including Aphelion Rangers we're talking about here. They don't stand a chance against the Yeomen once they're giving them a volley. I'm also going to mention Rohan's upgrades. They do actually technically have two unique upgrades, and it's the way they upgrade their buildings. They've got the choice to construct an arsenal or the recruitment camp. Now, the recruitment camp gives them all of their recruit speed, but the arsenal gives them all their elite troops. So if you're in a situation where you just want yeoman archers, but you don't want to have to get, you don't want spear throwers, you can just get the 50% training speed straight out the bat. Is better than going with tier 3. And faster too, actually. But when you want your, like for example, your economy building upgrades, sorry, my voice, you want the arsenal, because that's how you get it for the workshop. And the same with here, you need the arsenal for the royal guard and all the other upgrades. So it is really up to you which way you get to specialise to start with. But you're, in the end, going to want to have both. So it does work. It is a very cool looking system that is unique only to Rohan. And I think they should keep it like this because it is very good. And with the upgrades out of the way, we now come to the heroes. Merry is pretty much a carbon copy of Pippin. Their abilities used to be a little bit different back in the day. But the best thing to do with him is scout an area and throw him at a troll. Have him move the troll away from its lair and then have pikes run him down while the troll is focusing on Merry. Trolls get really focused on those hobbits. I don't know what it is, but it's really funny to watch. With Gamling, I recommend keeping him off his horse because of his ability Gamling's Horn. When he's on his horse, he becomes an archer who gets the Fire Arrow ability, which is nowhere near as good as a Get Out of Jail Free card out of Boromir's book. Harmit is another hero I actually recommend keeping off his horse because that way he stays in melee longer and he's healing up other units around him. When he's on his horse, that can happen, but it doesn't happen for as long or as effective as when he's just sat in the middle of a clump of units, mowing everything down, constantly regenerating health for everyone around him. Obviously, Phaedra's main thing is the special attack post, but also I never really use it myself, but he has two different stances that benefit him being able to destroy buildings. He can either reduce all his damage from structure arrows, or boost his damage against buildings by 50%. That is a big boost. Do not sleep on those abilities, even though I personally don't use them myself. Eowyn is the kind of hero killer that you really need to micro her abilities with to make her the best hero killer in the game. Her ability to the skies isn't quite that noticeable when you're looking from far away, plus her smite ability can just cut a hero's health in half, and then she can make herself almost immune to hero damage. So even elite heroes like Celeborn would stand no chance against this maiden of Rohan. Eomer's spear throw is much different to what it used to be back in BFME 1. Instead of just hitting one thing, it hits everything in its trajectory. So if you shoot at something from far away with the spear, everything in between is going to get hit. And the same goes with the Rider the Exiled. Use it on a large clump. It literally says in his profile, strength is mass slaying. He is the character you want to be getting a lot of kills with as well because of his pillager effect. He's just good overall, but he's a bit hard to get in the early game until Theoden is cured. Theoden starts in a weird position as a faction leader for Rohan. He starts off as purely a support hero, but not pure support, in the fact that, like with Denethor, all his abilities has a downside. But if you manage to banish all of your heroes into exile, they get so many good buffs, just don't let them die. And then once you've got enough power points, you can get Glorious King, and then Theoden is cured. And then once he goes onto his horse and just joins the fight in that manner, he then just gets massive leadership buffs. All you've got to do after you've got him to be cured is level him up quick enough, because he does kind of get slowed down by starting back at level 1 when you get this power. And speaking of powers, let's now go through all the powers. So I've already just mentioned Glorious King. It cures Theoden, gives him a bunch of stats. Unlike Gandalf the White, is so much better to get, and his White's his middle power. And then we have, at the top here, we have the draft command. Just throw it on any flour mill or farm. It just works really well. And the attack command can be used not even to draft your peasants, just throw it on your cavalry and you're going to do extra damage. It's really good in that fashion. The Aid of the Wazzers should be used similar to Lone Tower, but put back a bit more because of the amount of vision it gives. Plus, the second side of the power gets a cooldown reduction for each stone you have, so you can use it more proactively the more of these stones you can keep alive. The Vanguard of Rohan, I recommend using as a safety net. If you're in trouble, you want to try and get units away, pop the Vanguard, just have them mow down anything, even if it's pikes, just mow them down, because it slows them, meaning that you can just weaken the enemy enough to get away, or push the advantage and just really destroy the enemy. The Free Hunters are a good way to supplement your melee line. If you're going full infantry, it just means you've got an even more powerful hero who has 3 different abilities that work really well for Rohan, surprisingly. The Highborn Warhorses is a must-have in nearly every game, purely because it gives money to all of your stables. I'm kidding, no. The upgrade to the cavalry is almost essential. It makes banner carriers worth getting. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it doesn't really make it obvious here, but yeah, every building with the draft reduces the cost of banner carriers. So you can make banner carriers cost a lot less and a lot more viable for getting them when they're reduced by 5% for each drafted farm or flour mill you have. The Alliance Between Men of Elves power, I recommend to use kind of like Halbarad and the Edain and Elro here. Use them as a versatility tool because the Galathrim that you can summon have either got really good ranged attacks to deal with monsters or have Uruk damage with their swords. Don't underestimate that damage. It can cut through any armor as if it was the Horse Archers of Rohan, which is also really good. And similar to Vanguard of Rohan, you've got Cloudbreak, a just even more effective way to stun enemy units. Works really well on trolls because it freezes them in place as well, which is very efficient against factions that just you struggle to get away from. You just got more ways to get away, or even better, lock them in place, run around them, destroy everything before they get a chance to react. And now the military camp. Oh, so many good things to say about this. Very similar to what you get the rohirrim basically from BFME 2, where you can switch between spear and bow, which is also really good. But you can also have them start with upgrades. It takes a little bit of time, but the upgrades are free. You get money from this. It's just a really good thing altogether. It should be something you build near your main base so you know it's safe. Don't build it up in the front lines thinking it'll be a good idea, because that all you're doing from that is getting basic rohirrim, which you don't have to pay for the upgrades for. And then finally, last March of the Ents, I find is better to use them against outposts just to clean it up, because trying to take an outpost can be time consuming. As I've mentioned, if you've got a bunch of towers protecting it, a melee army is not going to be able to do much against it. But a bunch of Ents just throwing stones at a base can very easily destroy it. The problem is, against castles and camps, well, not so much camps, mostly castles, it's hard to get a good area to throw the stones at, so you end up wasting half their time before you even get to use them. Oh, and that is everything. Hope you've all enjoyed. I have definitely worked very hard on making these videos, on a lot of the prep work in advance, but I feel like I'm enjoying these. I'm going to continue to be able to make them twice a week, which is a good sign, because then we'll be able to get more content out more regularly. And then once we've done every faction, we can move on to something else and have even more good fun. So, farewell for now.